Yes, thanks, Steph. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle Wang, founder of Sagely, the advisory platform for entrepreneurs, and one of the partners for the City of Boston's Technical Assistance Program for Startups that Shanice will talk about more at the end of our panel today. I'm super excited to be moderating this panel. We're going to dive into one of the biggest challenges for founders as you build and scale your startup, deciding what to handle in-house and what to hire out for, especially when you've got limited resources and how to manage those relationships. So before we jump in, let's do a quick round of introductions so that you can meet our amazing panelists. Jessica, why don't you start us off? And then we'll go to Allison and Brianna.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Michelle. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess Sahagian. I'm the VP of Engineering, Systems, and Technology at Walden Local Meet. Previously, my startup experience in the Boston area has included Whoop and ConnectRN. I have experience working with contractors at these startups, but also at larger companies in my past, like Fidelity Investments and Raytheon. I've used development contractors to build everything from pre-seed MVPs all the way through Series F, post-IPO. Really excited to be here today and to be on this panel with these wonderful, wonderful folks.
I can go next if you want, Michelle. So, hi everybody. I'm Allison Byers. I'm the founder of a company with a funny name you might have heard of, Scroobius. This is my second startup. Before this, I co-launched and ran a medical device company we spun out of MIT and the Leahy Hospital Center. So I've got a lot of experience in startups, raising funding, and working with service providers. And at Scroobius, my company that I'm building now, we've already worked with over 900 founders on our platform where we help educate, guide, and have community and events and resources for founders all around understanding the fundraising process and how you put together compelling pitch material. And then we curate connections with investors and service providers. And we've actually aligned our own business model with our mission of diversifying the startup ecosystem by not charging founders. We work with founder-friendly service providers who cover that cost and then become really key network nodes for founders as they're growing and accessing resources. So I'm super excited to have this conversation today.
Hi, everyone. Michelle, Jessica, Allison, great to speak with you guys this morning, and Stephanie, Startup Boston and City of Boston. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Brianna Sochi, and I am the founder and chief operating officer at UberDoc. UberDoc is a digital healthcare platform connecting patients directly with doctors for in-person and telemedicine appointments. We offer transparent pricing and quick access to a network of over 5,000 clinicians nationwide. And we do this by bypassing traditional insurance and long wait times to make healthcare more accessible. During my time at UberDoc, I've worked with several external service providers, so everything from engineering to marketing, accounting, and legal. UberDoc is a female-founded and run company. So as a female founder and having dealt with gender biases and discrepancies, I'm really passionate about promoting diversity and inclusion in entrepreneurship. And recently I was awarded Startup Boston's Founder of the Year, and UberDoc was awarded Startup of the Year.
Amazing. Everyone is so impressive. Now that we're all friends, let's move on to our questions. So as a founder, I'm constantly weighing whether it's worth spending the time to do something myself, even if I'm not an expert at it, or to pay someone to do it for me. How do you make that decision? What factors do you consider when deciding between DIY and hiring a service provider? Jessica, can you start us off?
Sure. So I come from the tech arena, so I'm gonna speak with a technical lens. I think it's looking at the time cost, right? The opportunity cost. What am I going to spend my time on, and what would my time cost versus what am I going to pay someone else? And what do I really need out of this? What am I really looking for? Understanding what my requirements are and what I really want the end goal to be, whether is it an MVP, is it a long-term partner, that's really going to help me understand if I should DIY and I can just put together a quick MVP myself, or if I should work with someone who has maybe more expertise in a certain language or stack, or in a certain vertical that I don't have expertise in. I think it's knowing what you actually like to spend your time on as well, and understanding your own strengths and being really, really honest with yourself about that. I was never going to be the best programmer in the world, right? So I was more of a good strategist and a technical architect. So when it came time to develop something and develop an MVP, that's where I'm going to go to someone who has expertise in getting something out quickly and building that to get to product market fit. And then when I need to do something a little bit deeper, that's where my expertise comes in. So I think know thyself is my biggest advice.
Makes sense. Allison?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I'll kind of build on what Jessica said and make it a little bit broader than outsourcing technical or development components of your business. There's a lot to be said for the know thyself, but also define what this project is or what this work is. So creating a scope of work before you go try to find your provider. Right? When you're a startup founder, you never have enough people to do all the things, right? Like there's always things that you can outsource, but you're also always cash conscious or equity conscious. So it's a balance, but I think a lot of founders will fall into that trap of like, oh, I'll just contract someone. They're going to solve all my problems. Like I just need someone with this expertise and I'm going to contract them and they're going to come in and they're going to just do it and they're going to solve all the problems. But that's not how a service provider relationship works. It's different than having an employee, right? They can be great, excellent ways to grow your team without needing to incur that expense of hiring somebody, but you still have to define what is it that they are doing for you and what are the deliverables that come out of this project, whether it's technical in nature or not. Could be marketing, it could be whatever it is that you're looking to contract. But first, internally, you and your team make a document that defines this scope of work. And you can change it as you talk to providers. I do this myself. I'm in the process of this right now with marketing. And I'm saying, you tell me, is something not right in here? Is the timeline too short? Would you focus on something else? Which is a way to also vet who do you want to work with? What do they think of your scope of work? But first, you need to really go out knowing here is why I'm contracting somebody and I'm paying them to do a specific thing. Don't leave it amorphous.
Great advice. Okay, so let's say as a founder, as a founding team, we've decided that we need help and we need to bring on a vendor or service provider. What are the first steps in figuring out what's available out there? How does a founder go about finding providers? Are there any support programs or resources that can help with that? Brianna, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. My first step when finding a service provider is usually to ask for recommendations and network referrals from my peers, mentors, and other founders. Really leverage the startup ecosystem. We have such a supportive network here in Boston. Actually, my team and I have been involved in Startup Boston for a few years now, and we actually met our current development partner at Startup Boston a few years ago. We just met them networking, and we've been working together ever since. So relationships like those are really important and really strong.
So I'm going to jump in here on this one too. Totally agree. And Brianna, that's everybody's first thing, right? Recommend someone to me because you want to work with somebody that a person you trust tells you is a good person to work with, right? You're building on that trust factor and that signal of quality. So that is the right first step. Not everybody has that network or has people who can recommend appropriate vendors. And I think specifically too with development and tech, that's one of the hardest service provider relationships to identify especially if you're a female non-technical founder. It is one of the biggest challenges. But I will share that at Scroobius, because we do work with so many service providers and we get those requests constantly from our members is, does anyone have a good person for this? Does anybody know someone for this? We're only a few weeks out from releasing a whole feature in our platform that is community vetted resources, founder-friendly service providers that will be on our platform, discoverable with reviews from the community. They cannot be listed without that. So we're building that type of connectivity within our platform. And I'll drop some links in the chat, but again, it's no cost to a founder. You can apply for a sponsored account, or we have a plan that's $1 a year and you can access that too. So I'm not trying to be salesy, but it is a need to have a system you can access to reach that array of vendors that are recommended by trusted people who you know, but you might not always know them.
Yeah.
I just want to jump in and add, if you don't have that network, make sure you do your due diligence on folks that you're working with. I mean, this is going to sound extremely simple, but Google people. Google them, go deep and look them up, look up their social media, really see how they're interacting with people. Look at their GitHubs, especially for technical, right? Look at what are they constantly developing? Are they constantly working on different things? What is their area of expertise? Does it seem to match up? Do you or have a quick conversation, have those like 15-minute intro chats and say, hey, I just want to pick your brain and get to know the person, see if you vibe well together. That's the technical expertise needs to be there. And they need to be able to know how to deliver on those deliverables that Allison was mentioning and the requirements that you've outlined. But you also need to be able to work well together. Hopefully this is, you develop a relationship where, you can recommend this shop or people or contractor going forward after, even if you have a long relationship or a short relationship with them, you want to really have that back and forth that feels good. And so get that 15 minutes on the calendar, talk to them, reach out to different folks, and really, really do that deep work to figure out if someone is who they say they are, because now in internet land, people can say whatever they want.
Yep, completely agree. That kind of is a great segue into our next question, which is, let's assume that a startup has shortlisted a couple of vendors. What is the best way to vet them? What key questions should we be asking during these reference calls? And yes, always do the reference calls. Even if you're busy, always do them. Allison, can you take this one first?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of standard questions to ask, but because I do focus on working with founders who identify as underrepresented and I'm an advocate in this space, I also focus my answers here. If you are a woman, if you're a minority founder, if you identify as underrepresented in other ways, you've likely experienced being taken advantage of, and you're likely more wary of working with providers that you don't know. And so it is really important, if that's how you identify, to ask some questions about it. When you get references from a vendor, are there any women in there? Are there any people of color in there, or however you identify? Ask for a reference from a person that you identify with to see if they've worked with them before and have someone willing to speak on their behalf. That says a lot. And ask them whatever you want so that you feel comfortable that they have intentionality in who their client base is, and they understand your needs. Do they understand you? Do they understand your market? Have they worked in your industry before? Do they believe in what you're doing? That's an important question to ask too, because while they're not full-time on your team, you really need a provider who sees the value in what you're building and is on board and committed, or they're not going to prioritize your work, right? They're working with multiple clients at a time most of the time. So you want to ask that type of question, especially when you are early stage. You need someone to have conviction in what you're doing. And I'll give a little plug for Michelle here. She didn't introduce herself, but I leverage advisors heavily when I'm vetting service providers. My advisors have industry expertise in areas that complement where I may not have that. So I pull them in and have them directly interview service providers to make sure that we have that right expertise on board. Michelle's company, Sagely, can help you connect with advisors if that's something that you're looking to build out. And particularly to Jessica's point on the technical side, I'm non-technical. I have a technical advisor who is in it, who is vetted our development partners, who was in the work with me and could look at the output and see if it was quality work and tell me when it wasn't. Because sometimes you as the founder won't be able to know. And so you have to leverage your advisor network to help you out.
Completely agree. We've also had an advisor vet every single service provider we've worked with. So, Jessica, Brianna, anything to add?
I would like to echo Allison on that. That's a great point. Something I'm now much more comfortable doing is when I look at service providers and their team, like, hey, do you guys look like me? Are there other women there as well? So it's really important to see if there's a cultural fit and the team working styles, are complementary to your team. For us, we when we vet service providers, we love to get our entire team on the call. We're a small team, right? And we love to get them all on the call because it's everyone's decision, right, to move forward in the partnership.
I would 100% agree. I think that the mission and the vision and the values is that shared. And do they really believe, like Allison and Brianna said, do they really believe in what you're doing? And are they going to be that partner? And do you feel like they could almost be an advisor? I've worked with some incredible, dev contractors who have really embedded themselves in the teams and said, we believe in this, and here's actually what you're not thinking about, and here's what you could do better, and really like having that advisory potential within them. I think is really important. I also think that, seeing yourself represented, like Allison and Brianna both said, are these folks who, they're willing to think about the long term and they don't just think about the short term. I think a lot of times, especially in development, it's like build an MVP, get in, get out, and then there's a lot of technical debt incurred, and you get to a point where you hire an onshore development team and an in-house development team, and all of a sudden they have all of this work to clean up because the product didn't scale at all, right? And so you want something for an MVP, you don't want something that's like super heavy and you don't want to take forever to build it, but you also want to be building with best practices and future use in mind. You want to think about your company 3 years and 5 years from now. How, as much as possible, can you be as simple, as stable, as scalable and secure? And how can you build with that in mind from the get-go? And those are the sort of questions that I would, in sort of partnership, I would want from at least a development contractor, but any contractor, right? They're going to set you up. They're not just to plug a hole in the interim, maybe they are, but if your requirements are that they set you up for the long term, really be asking those questions about how they're going to do that.
Yeah, completely agree. We had a service provider that actually, most of them tell you yes to everything, right? If they're just trying to get your business, they'll be like, yeah, we can do everything. But I had one that told me no all the time. And at first I had to get used to it, but then I was like, okay, why is this a no? And if they could explain why it's a no, and maybe offer other suggestions, it's a very green flag for me. So on to our next question. What are some common red flags that signal maybe a service provider might not be the right fit for an early stage startup, or maybe just not the right fit for the company culture? Jessica, thoughts there?
Oh, goodness gracious. There's a lot. I think that, like you mentioned, Michelle, yes, we can do everything. Yeah, you want it, we can make it. I think that it's like typical if you go to a restaurant that they do everything. They're like, we're an Italian, American, Japanese fusion, da da da, and their menu is like 20 pages long. If you can't really do everything well, right? So as a contractor, what are you specialized in, right? Do you specifically work in a certain tech stack? Do you work with a certain language? Why? Are you specialized with like e-commerce? I mean, what is your specialty? If they do everything and they're attempting to do everything, they're probably not doing it super well. I would also look out. Again, Google is your best friend. Look people up. Google them. See what other work they've done. Look at their GitHubs. Look at their Twitter. Look at their Facebooks. Look at all of this. And red flags are like, are they, what is their personality like? Are they super combative? Are they antagonistic? Are they, how are they generally, if they comment on things, follow them, on these platforms and see how they interact, because that's how they'll interact with you. And so really, really do that deep due diligence. I know it sounds silly, Google someone, but I found like the best like, I guess, warning flags have come when I've done that, and I've said, oh, okay, that's probably not somebody I would want to work with. There's a mismatch there. And then it's like, okay, what they, maybe don't even move on to the reference round or whatever the second round is.
Yep. Great point. Brianna, Allison, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think there are two red flags that my team and I look out for when choosing a service provider. The first is that checking to see if the vendor has startup experience. If the vendor primarily works with large enterprises, they may not understand the unique challenges of the fast-paced environments of an early stage startup. Additionally, in relation to that, be on the lookout for overly complex processes. So, we worked with vendors where, when they're used to dealing with larger clients, they have really elaborate approval processes or extensive documentation requirements, which are great and work for larger clients typically, but they can really slow down progress and make it really difficult to be agile for a much more fast-paced environment.
Love those.
Yeah. I don't have anything big to add to what's already been said, but just, we're talking about contracting providers at the very early stage of building a company, right? So a lot of this is, do they get back to you quickly? What's the response time? Do you feel like you can contact them and reach them and they respond in a way that you need, to Brianna's point, quickly because you're moving quickly? Do they take the time to explain to you things that are happening that, again, whatever the industry you're contracting in, it could be technical, it could be you're a lawyer, whoever it is that you're working with, do they explain what you need to know, or do they glaze over it and they don't, right? I've had that issue particularly with technical before, and sometimes with legal too, where they don't talk to me as if I'm going to understand, and I will understand. So explain it to me. And if that's the case, trust your gut. If something doesn't feel right, cut it loose. You're paying them. You are contracting them. And so, listen to yourself. And if something doesn't feel right working with them, don't spend more time on it. Make sure you're looking out for your own business.
Great advice. So what role do transparency and communication play in building a successful relationship with service providers? And how can startups foster that? Brianna, did you want to start us off on this one?
Sure. So I believe that building a relationship and rapport with your vendors and strategic partners is just as important as being in alignment on goals and milestones for the actual project itself. So, I believe that it's important to really take the time to get to know each other, right? Get to know each other's businesses, get to know each other's unique challenges, and understand working styles of your team. This really allows the teams to reinforce those shared values and emphasize mutual success of both the parties.
Completely agree.
I mean, transparent communication is everything when you're working with the service provider. So yeah, right off the bat, how are you going to communicate? Do they have a Slack channel they're going to add you to? Are you going to add them to yours? Do you function better over email? What are the primary communication channels, and agree on them? This is how we reach each other. Are you working with one person, or are you working with a team? If you're working with a team, who on their team are they outsourcing work to? And meet those people. Meet the people who are doing the work for you. It's not always your main point of contact. Are those people going to rotate around? Are they stable? Are you contracting for a specific group of people, or are they interchangeable in the eyes of the service provider? You need to know all of those things, and you need to know who you're directly communicating with. That's a huge part of it. And related to, the question before, if you start seeing new names on things that you don't recognize, especially if it's documents being sent back and forth, that's a red flag. Who's doing this work and who's talking to you? And is there a disconnect within the provider's company?
Yep. Completely agree. Jessica, did you have anything to add here?
I think Brianna and Allison covered it. I think, yeah, the communication and transparency, setting up that understanding of where are we communicating, when are we communicating, what are the connection and touch points? Like, are you doing like a scrum of scrums or something? Not to get too technical and agile with it, but are you talking every single day? Do you have a stand up in the mornings where you're having a 15-minute briefing? What do you expect out of that? How are you tracking your work? How are you going to know what they're working on and they know what you're working on? And what is the platform? What is your program management, project management platform? And what other meetings should they be in? If they're going to embed in your company, and it's not just a quick like, hey, deliver this MVP and then you're gone, right? If it's like that longer relationship, getting them access to Slack, having them sit in on marketing meetings, because everything in a startup is so many people are wearing like 7 different hats, right? There's a lot that happens in different meetings. You want these folks in those meetings. Do you want them to meet with marketing? Do you want them to meet with legal? Do you want them to meet with accounting? Or who is responsible for filtering that information to them that they may need to do their job correctly? And so understanding all of those touch points and communication dependencies is really important.
Yep, completely agree. So I'd love to hear, we've covered a lot already, and I'd like to hear some final thoughts. And these final thoughts are kind of important. We're all here because we want to give back to the community, and we've all made mistakes, right? And that's how we learn, and that's why we're here, and we've managed we manage service providers better now because of those mistakes. But I'd love to hear what's one thing you've learned from a mistake that you've made with a service provider. Allison.
Sure. So related a little bit to what I said before, but a mistake I definitely made multiple times. It takes a while of working with service providers to get comfortable in knowing what to look for and what is a mistake, is holding on to a relationship longer than I should have because I was being too nice to the person on the provider side, right? I didn't want to upset anyone. The work wasn't what I wanted, but we can work it out. Let's work together. I'll help upskill or train or, and it went on for too long without that grounding, like I said before, of this is a contracting relationship. They are not my employee. And if they're not doing the work you need, then you've got to end it quicker and move on to the right provider, because you don't have the time and you don't have the money when you're an early stage startup to let that continue on because you feel bad, right? It sounds a little bit harsh, but it is a different relationship than if you hire someone onto your team, and keeping that perspective is really important. On the flip side, I will say, I do think service providers are really undervalued for their willingness and ability to open a network to you. They are huge connector nodes, and most service providers are not out there to take advantage of you or be malicious, right? And there's a ton, especially in Boston, who really authentically care about founders and our innovation economy and want to help And so I know we were talking about mistakes, but I did want to say on the flip side, this isn't negative. Service providers can be key for startup founders.
Great point. Brianna?
Sure. And that's a great point, Allison. I've definitely experienced that as well. One that sticks out to me is experiencing misalignment in vendor selection. So to give you an example, during our last investment deal, we chose a very large transactional legal firm to represent us. Their fees were way too high for us, but they were a household name, and we were like, we need this person to do this big, investment deal for us. Going back to something I mentioned earlier, they had really complex processes, and they were not suitable for the needs of a smaller early stage company. We spent a lot of that investment paying off those legal fees. Looking back, opting for a more appropriately sized firm would have resulted in probably better service and more agility and lower costs. I don't, similarly what Allison said, I don't refer to it as a mistake, but instead, a learning opportunity, and I don't regret it. And instead, my team and I have just made more informed decisions since then.
I would echo what Allison and Brianna have said. I also would add, a service provider is not your friend. And I don't mean that they're your enemy, but I mean, this is not someone where, you've known them since kindergarten. You're going to let some things slide, right? You're paying this person. You're paying these people to provide a service for you. And I think, I'm someone who has benefited in my career from people giving me chances. Sometimes when I didn't deserve them, but giving me chances to learn new things and grow. And so I like to give people chances, and I sometimes to my own detriment, right? You have to have that line where it's like, okay, this might not be working out, or this person isn't actually delivering on their contract, and you need to balance the empathy and execution. There have been times in my career where I think my mistakes have been going too far on the empathy side and not enough on the execution side. And there's a balance, right? You can have both. You don't want to go too far on the execution side and, have absolutely no consideration for another person. But you also have to balance those two things. And that's something that, 20 years into my career, I'm still working on. Right. And I think, making sure that folks, align to what they've been expected to deliver and what they've signed on the dotted line to deliver, and also being great to work with and having that rapport is great, but don't prioritize the rapport over actually being able to do their job.
Completely agree.
Jessica, I will say, I build into my SOWs in qualifications things like must have a good sense of humor and appreciate sarcasm, right? You can't undercount it. What you just said, you have to enjoy working with a person, and if you're going to have a personality mismatch, not the right provider for you.
We spend 40 hours at least of our life at work every week. You got to like who you work with. You have to be able to laugh. You have to be able to have a good time, but they also have to be able to get the work done. It's that balance.
Especially in a startup environment. And a couple of you have touched on it, but definitely have a contract. No matter how much you think you don't need a contract, you need a contract. And put all of these communication things in there, what you want to use for communication, how often they want to respond, how quickly you want them to respond. All of these things need to go into a contract. We do have one question. I want to hit on this question too before we move on. How much do you think AI can play into providing services? Does it replace? I'm assuming what B means is does it replace to a certain extent hiring service providers?
I don't know if it.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
You go ahead.
Okay, I'll go. I think it depends on which service provider you're talking about, right? And I think it depends on what you actually need done. I think there are do you need somebody to whip you up some quick code and build it? They have no code tools right now, like Bubble, and there's a couple others that you can build a no code website and platform. Okay, the AI there can help you. But who's monitoring that? If you're not an expert in development, then once you have that MVP, once you have that whatever, if somebody asks you to explain it, can you explain it? And I really think AI is more of a helper and isn't a stand-in. That's at least my view on that.
I was going to say the exact same thing. I think AI is great to help you make a more informed decision. However, it is not a replacement for a strategic partner or a service provider that you need to bring in to fill gaps for the skill set that your team doesn't have.
I think it is a great question for a provider. Do they leverage AI in their work and their deliverables for you? That's something that you should understand, because a lot of providers do use it now to complement or create deliverables. And that's important to know. It's not good or bad. It could be good, but it's important to know.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for sharing such valuable insights. I'm sure everyone here took away some amazing practical advice. Steph, I'll hand it back to you to wrap things up.
So we're first going to go and bring Shanice here from the City of Boston on stage. And she actually, as promised in all of the marketing and also in the chat, is going to talk more about the City of Boston's Technical Assistance Program, which actually, ironically, both Allison and Michelle are a part of. So honestly, Michelle, Shanice is going to do a much better job of explaining it. So I'm going to pause there, but stay here and learn with you all. So Shanice, can you take it from here?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us this morning. As Stephanie mentioned, and Michelle and Allison's part of, the city has a technical assistance program. This program helps matches our small business owners and our entrepreneurs to business experts, consultants, and service providers that they may need. There's a little bit of a process where you meet with someone from the city, particularly from the Economic Opportunity Inclusion team. We learn more about what your challenges are, and we try to match you to our business experts, consultants that are in our pool. Historically, this program has connected our local small business owners to their accountants, legal services, marketing support systems, or graphic designers, and there's many other service providers in our pool. But recently this year, to extend this program to our startup founders, we have added Sagely and Scrubius to this pool. So it's a great opportunity to share this with our startup folks who may be interested in using startup providers. Sorry, my screen froze for a second.
No, you're totally good.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So if you are a Boston-based startup and you're interested in using Sagely or Scrubius, or learning more about other startup, other technical assistance providers that we have in our pool, please contact me directly. You can email me at shanice.wallace@boston.gov. I will put it in the chat, and Stephanie will add it in the follow-up email after this event is over.
It definitely will be included in the follow-up email. And I actually have a follow-up question for you too, real quick, Shanice, just while we have everyone here learning more about the program. So when they reach out to the City of Boston, for recommendations, maybe they come to you and they say, hey, we're looking for help, or reference for someone in legal, for example. What happens after that? Is it what perk is there of going through the city versus another avenue? Would you be open to speaking more on that?
Yes. And sorry, I should make that clear beginning. So every service provider is contracted with the city for a certain amount of contracted work. So I believe it's up to $10,000 worth of work. So you have a chance to use these services up to about $10,000 worth of work. So that is the perk of going through this program, is that you get a chance to have a graphic designer work with you and cut down on costs. And what this means is that when you email me, I'll learn a lot more about what your startup is doing, what your challenges are, and then I will have to now look through our pool of service providers and make that match for you. And then, of course, we will make sure you work with a service provider and you get a chance to speak before you start contracting. It's a good chance to apply everything that we've learned today in our event series, in our virtual webinar, to make sure that your service provider is a good match for you. Of course, this means it takes a little bit of time, and but I am looking forward to learning more about what your needs are as a startup and hopefully matching you with a great provider.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing. And as Shanice mentioned, it's also going to be included in the follow-up email, which will go out in probably about 20 or so minutes.